Okay, welcome back to another author interviews at Crystal Lake. And today our guest is Rick Hipson. And I'm going to turn it over to him and let him introduce himself. So take it away.
All right. Hey, thanks so much, Anita. Really huge pleasure being here. It has been an absolute honor to deal with everything Crystal Lake Entertainment related. So you guys have all been an amazing team, and appreciate you talking with me today. Especially, it's a kind of an extra bonus too that I just recently learned that you are a fellow Canadian. So it's nice chatting with you. So I'm all the way over here in southwestern Ontario with my other half, or my better half, and my son and my kids and all that kind of good stuff. So super excited to be here to talk about my newly published book, of course, um, Reviewer's Guide to Writing Book Reviews and How to Get Paid for Them. So it's a pleasure to chat with you about that today.
Okay, so tell everybody a little bit about the Reviewer's Guide to Writing Book Reviews.
Sure. So I wanted to make a book so it wouldn't take a rocket surgeon to figure out what it was all about. I wanted people to look at that and realize right away if it's might be something for them or not. So the title is it's a very linear title. There's no bells and whistles as far as that goes, and it's exactly what it is. It's me basically taking 20 years of all my experience of having reviewed books, movies, that sort of thing, magazines, what have you, and basically trying to shove it all into a nice, tidy book that people can benefit from. I know certainly it can be a very hard thing to know what to do. Sometimes you don't know if you're writing a review, whether or not you want to get paid for it, or whether or not you just want to really, you know, shout it from the rooftops of your last favorite book that you read, and you want as many people as possible to get the same enjoyment out of it. Where do you start? So this is kind of a nice way for people that don't really know where to start. They want to they want to level up their game. They want to support their authors, their publishers, their favorite books, their fellow readers more. This is a great way for them to be able to do that. And I think from some of the early reviews that have come in already, I think I hit the nail on the head as far as coming up with something that's concise, that's fun to read. It's not boring. I mean, let's face it. Talking about reviews themselves isn't really the sexiest thing that you can talk about in the horror industry, but I think I'm obviously biased that they're super important. There's a lot of value in reviews for both readers, publishers, and the authors. So this is a great way to not only get your feet wet in the review game, but depending on where you're at, whether you're getting paid already and you just want to do a little bit better, I think it's a really nice thing for people to put in their toolbox, whether they already have some tools or they're looking for their first tool to put in their toolbox to help out with their reviews.
Definitely. So, what sparked the inspiration for you to sit down and write a book?
That's a good question. So I've honestly thought about doing something like this for a while, or doing something to kind of, I guess, give back. And maybe from a little bit of a selfish point, I wanted to see if I could validate myself into thinking that, have I learned anything myself over the last 20 years? I mean, obviously, it's validation being able to see my name in print, but maybe it just means I was so annoying that they thought, let's just give this guy a space in our page so he just shuts up and leaves us alone and stops bugging us all the time to get in our magazine. So I thought, is there some way that I can get back to people to see if maybe some of the things I've learned along the way, whether it's by my mistakes or by my successes, can I help other people? And I thought, well, what the heck do I know? And so that was always something in the back of my mind. But then I thought, well, going through the social media group, certainly with the Books of Horror group, with their Freeview book, with just various social medias, whether it's Twitter X or Instagram or TikTok or Facebook, I've been noticing over the last few years, especially maybe as the horror genre itself is blowing up and there's just a lot more readers, a lot more writers, that I've been seeing a lot more posts with folks saying, hey, how do I become a reviewer? Or I see authors posting they're much more sexier books than I have, with all their early arcs, and they're gorgeous. And people say, "How that's great. How do I get in on this action? How do I get these arcs?" To me, not being adverse to bragging rights, I'll get a beautiful arc and I'll post it up and said, "Hey, this is the next book I'll be reviewing." And people will say, "Well, I'm so jealous. How do I get that book?" So I've been seeing a lot of social media posts that range kind of from there to simply folks that say, wow, I wish I could review better so that I could, get in the game of getting these beautiful arcs kind of thing or getting into the magazines. So I've been noticing a lot more of that. So I guess in a way I kind of let is I don't know, maybe cheesy as it or cliche as it sounds, I kind of let the market dictate what it wanted. And it seemed like people really wanted something that could guide them along the way. And so that kind of got me thinking, well, who the heck am I? I certainly will never tell anybody that I'm the, the end all for an authoritative person on how to write the best review in the world. But think I know enough of what it took for me to get here, and maybe those folks that aren't quite there yet where I am, I do have something to offer to at least get them to the point where I am, so they can either be at that level or, you know, bypass the ceiling, so to speak, of where I've reached and do even better, maybe to the point where I can learn something from them. So I sort of took all of that and I thought maybe it is time for me to sit down and let's see what I know. So that's what I did. I sat down and the first draft took a couple of weeks to get out, and I was sort of surprised at how in depth reviewing was once they started laying it all down. That was really my first step too, was sort of outlining everything of what I thought were all the various components of a review, starting from there. And then I maybe had, I don't know, 10 good points that I thought would be good. If I cover all these things, people know how to write a review. And then as I got into it, it just kind of got bigger and bigger. And I kept thinking, oh, what about this? Or what about this? Well, yeah, that's another question that I've heard people ask a lot. How can I answer that? And that's essentially sort of what went into the stew of my book.
Interesting. Yeah, because I see a lot of on the indie side, like I do fantasy as well. On the fantasy side, I see a
Yeah.
lot of authors actually getting into reviewing as well
Mhm.
as joining review blogs and things like that. So it is interesting that more people are looking to get into reviewing.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting, and I love seeing it. There's no such thing as competition. I mean, the more reviews that we have out there, I think it's better. I was just recently asked a question actually about, do I think there's too many? If somebody wants to get a reviewer reviewing, should they consider there's already too many? There's no such thing as too many
Yes.
reviewers. Certainly, being on the other side of the fence too, I think that if I had, you know, 1,000 people that want to review my book, that's fantastic. The only thing better than that is having 2,000 people that are willing to
Yeah.
review my book.
Yes.
So,
And as an indie author, we welcome any and all reviewers. If you review our book, we will worship at your feet. I'm just saying.
yes, absolutely. I've got my little pad over here just for that, so I can get down and worship all the reviewers without hurting my knees.
Okay, so what did you enjoy about writing the book?
Uh, I found that going back to the completely selfish part of that answer is that it really validated that maybe I do know a few things about reviewing books. I mean, like anything, you do it for so long and you don't really stop to appreciate the things it took for you to get to a certain level where people want to throw their money at you and actually invite you to write for things. So I think that was validating and thinking that, okay, I do actually have quite a bit to share. And I think that this would be important for people. And I think it was also sort of a trip down memory lane as well, as I referenced a lot of steps along my journey from the very beginnings to uh, uh, being told I wasn't good enough to publish for my favorite magazine. And then I could talk about this a little bit later too. And then actually, the worst thing was actually being published in my favorite magazine and then being told it wasn't good enough to eventually writing for professional markets and getting paid okay money doing that, and then double dipping. So for me it was a walk down memory lane, so I thought that was really cool. So it gave me a chance to sort of take a step back from the ledge and kind of see everything that I've gone through. It was really cool as well, reminiscent about the various books that I got to review, remembering some of those again. I'm all about double dipping, and I'm all about milking that cow till it's dry, and then feeding it, and then milking it some more. So it was really cool. Also going back and thinking about some of the interviews that I did as a result of the book, and it really made a lot of fun for me. I think the most fun I had writing this was realizing that this really is something that I think I can provide to other people that would really help them. And then, of course, I thought after writing the book, well, what other ways can I help them, with this book? And all of a sudden, it became a matter of trying to think of cool marketing ideas, maybe doing a workshop out of this book as well, which is something I do plan on doing as well. So I guess to summarize all that, it was a lot of fun realizing what I learned along the way, and it was a lot of fun realizing that I not only have tools that I've used, but tools that I've got that can really help other people to increase their game and hopefully get a lot more enjoyment out of the books they read and the authors that they're probably going to get a chance to interact with and meet along the way.
Mhm. So, as you mentioned, you've been published in magazines like Rue Morgue and Cemetery Dance, and you have your own podcast, Dark Bites. So, how did you get started, and what has that journey been like, and what have been some of the highlights of it?
Ah, I love that question because there's a lot of highlights. I'll maybe touch on 3 or 4 of them. So, I mean, initially I got started with writing. I put a couple magazines over here for reference. So, the very first publication that I ever wrote for was this little guy over here. Most of the magazines I shared off writing don't exist anymore. I like to think it's not because of me, but I will plead the fifth. So that's Insidious Reflections. So that's the very first magazine that I ever wrote for. I don't know if you can see. I've got kind of my skull in the way too. I've actually got that was their first print magazine with Jack Ketchum on the front of it, our late friend Dallas Mayer, and that was my first main highlight. Was I got to interview him as my very first author that I've ever interviewed, which I think doesn't I like to think, yeah, it's because I'm just that charming that the best in the business want to chat with me, but frankly, it's just the kind of person that Dallas was. Fantastic guy. Didn't matter if you're starting out or if you've been at it for years and a veteran. He would talk to you, give you the time of day, and he would support you. So that was a huge, huge highlight being able to chat with Dallas. And I've since got on to he eventually became a bit of a mentor and my friend. Very, I'm all about the nostalgia. So, I mean, I've got emails exchanges from him that I'll never delete. I went on to have some pretty cool conversations with him as well. So that was a huge highlight for me. And that was a big stepping stone because I proved I could have a great conversation that'd be well received. And then I carried on and I didn't get a penny for it. Chris Hedges, who ran that magazine, was fantastic. So he also did handmade books. So and he would do mugs as well. You can see a couple of where am I here? I'm sorry, I'm a little bit mirrored, so I'm going in the opposite
Yeah.
directions here. So I've got mugs above me over there that he's got stories on too. So he would give me first grabs at that. I would get free copies of the magazines, early editions of books he was working on. So that was all really cool. He was a great guy. For anybody watching this as well that's just brand new to reviewing, I got really lucky from that. Most of the time when you're starting out, you're probably not going to get paid anything, just to let you know, except for that exposure and the experience and things like that. But I would eventually go on to write for my friend Greg Lamberson of Slime City fame. He ran a website called fearzone.net. If you check it out now, I don't even, last time I checked it was just full of bots. It doesn't exist anymore either. Um, but he was fantastic. Greg has known a lot of people in the business. That was actually my first paying gig. So I think he paid me $10 a review, no matter how short or how long they were. So that was kind of cool. But most importantly, that got me in touch with a lot of great authors, some filmmakers as well. I've had great conversations through that. And then I got a lot of experience as well writing for um, writing. What was I going to say? Writing for Hell Notes as well. That's another great site through Journalstone. So they don't pay, but they're very popular. So they tend to get a lot of review requests for both authors and filmmakers. They've been great at getting me in touch with a lot of other folks. And I found too, sorry, going back, one of my biggest highlights that I had too was working with Gauntlet Press Publishing. So I've been writing with them pretty much from the beginning. It was actually thanks to, again, Dallas Mayor Jack Ketchum, where he just had a book come out called Only Child, which I've got right behind me here, one of my favorite books ever. And that got me introduced through Chris or through uh, Gauntlet Press, which is run by Barry Hoffman. It's a one man show. He has his daughter helping him out, but it's basically all him. And Barry is a super connector. So my probably one of my biggest highlights as far as the reviewing is one of the books that Barry put out was called Hope and Miracles. Uh, Shosh or what the heck is it's a long title. Hope I should grab it if I can, but it's called Hope and Miracles. The Green Mile, Shawshank Redemption, two screenplays by Frank Darabont. So it was all about, as the title suggests, it's all about those two movies. A lot of insider information with a couple of scripts from Frank Darabont, which Frank Darabont was very much on board, hugely supportive, provide lots of materials. And I got the crazy idea, like I always do. It's should never be, never be afraid to reach for the stars. And you hit the moon, then you're still kind of halfway there. So I thought, hey Barry, what do you think the chances are that Frank Darabont would want to have a conversation with me about this book? So he gave me his contact information, and this man is hard to reach. It's like looking for zebras and I don't know, striped forest or whatever your knowledge is. He's hard to reach. So after months of hounding his agent and hounding him, I finally got in touch with him and ended up having a phone conversation with Frank Darabont. So that's probably I don't really get starstruck too much, but that was the one time where I was maybe 5 minutes into the conversation. I'm like, yeah, here I am having this conversation with holy crap, I'm having a conversation with Frank friggin' Darabont. So that was a huge highlight for me. And then a third highlight that I'll leave with is later on down the road, after you know sort of paving my way and being consistent with a couple of publications, primarily through Cemetery Dance and Rue Morgue, um, the editor Andrea Subasati. I always mess up her name. Luckily, be meeting her at a convention, so she can tell me her name in person, so I don't screw it up every time I try to say it. Out of the blue, she said, "Hey Rick, I've got this. I want you to write an article on spec. It was for the last voyage of the Demeter movie. Unfortunately, we don't have anything all on this. We don't have any screeners. We don't have any pictures, any assets, anything. But I know that you've had a lot of conversations with Dracula related stuff. I pitched him Dracula related stuff. I was lucky enough to have several conversations on my podcast with Dacre Stoker, who's might ring a bell to a lot of people watching this, who's Bram Stoker's great grand nephew. And so I was pretty familiar. I felt I could probably tackle something like this. And then I ended up getting hooked up with chatting with Andre Overdahl, who was the director of the film, Bragi Shute Jr., who was the original screenwriter for the film, as well as Javier Botet, who played Dracula, and a whole bunch of other infamous characters. So that was a huge highlight for me, and I kind of knocked it out of the park. And as a matter of fact, it's my references are here. Where am I here? There you go. So I actually framed that's the article there, and ended up that was my first feature article that I actually did for Rue Morgue. Um, the issue escapes me right now, but that's actually on the front of the cover as well. So that was a huge highlight for me. For them essentially invited me for it, saying, "We got absolutely nothing for this. Have a shot at it." So I ended up covering the film and interviewing those guys without ever actually seeing the film. And from what I've heard, I did an okay job on it. So I'm super proud of that one. So that was a huge highlight.
Well, that sounds like an interesting career. So, what is the hardest thing about writing a review, and what do you enjoy most about writing a review?
Good question. So, and it's a question that kind of I have to do a mental split on that too, because they're kind of on opposites. So, I always want to think about the funnest part of writing a review. But to start off, though, I would say the hardest part for me is capturing the emotional essence of a book. Because I think that that's what really makes or break. And I think it goes for movies as well, maybe even more so for movies, but certainly for books. There's a lot of folks I know out there that can, they can read a book or watch a movie, and 10 years later, they're reciting dialogue from a movie that they've seen. I just watched Jaws last night, and other than "we're gonna need a bigger boat," I couldn't recite any of the other lines for you. I'm just not that kind of guy. So I find that you don't always remember what a book said, but if it's a great book, you always remember how a book made you feel. And I find that that's probably the most challenging part. I don't know if I'd say difficult because some books it's just super easy because they're so resonating. Other books you kind of have to really dig to get the emotional aspect of the book across. But I find that's the most challenging part is doing that. And some books are very abstract, where they're not really plot driven. They're more uh, character driven or more challenge driven, where the author threw a major hurdle at the character, and the entire book is essentially about the character trying to get through this. So trying to summarize a plot is very difficult. So then trying to fall back on, well, how did that book make me feel? And then trying to translate that, it's like you're doing a little bit of magic. Again, to use Dallas Mayer, he talked about, actually, I think Stephen King did the same thing. A lot of authors will tell you this, that writing a book is much like telepathy, where the idea is you're trying to make the readers feel is as close to how you felt while you're writing it a scene. And for me, that's kind of what I try to do too, is I try to tap into a bit of a telepathy when I'm reviewing a book to try to make a reader feel what I felt when I'm reading the book. And I think that a lot of times I absolutely nail it. And that is a fantastic feeling. So I guess in a way I could kind of piggyback and use a bit of a shortcut to cheat myself on this question and say that that's also simultaneously the funnest part of a review is when I can sit back and think, yeah, I absolutely nailed this one. I can read this one in 10 years and I can revisit exactly how that book made me feel because I absolutely nailed how that made me feel. And I think it's the biggest challenge too is trying to do that in a way that's concise and not boring. Because I think that no matter how fantastic a book is and how assured I am that everybody likes the same books as I do, are going to absolutely love this book, if I don't put it across in a way that's fun, that captures them, gets your attention in that first sentence, gives them an engaging, guts of the review to enjoy while they're reading it, and then leave a nice hook at the very end of it to kind of resonate with them, it doesn't really matter how great the book is or how well I did at explaining how great the book is, because I've got to keep that reader's attention through my review so they can kind of think, huh, that kind of is interesting. Maybe I should check this book out as well. So I find that's a challenge is getting that telepathy across and doing it in a way that's engaging for somebody so that they're in from the first sentence and then right from the end sentence thinking, huh, I should, that kind of sat with me for a little bit. I'm going to go check this book out.
So how do you handle a review when you were disappointed in the book or part of the book?
Sure. So that's you're asking some great questions, and that's a really popular question. I think that that's the one that I see quite a bit. Almost, I think on every day that ends in Y, you're going to find at least somebody across social media is asking that exact question. So it's a really popular one because I think that everybody that wants to read a book, they or wants to review a book rather, they're all about wanting to celebrate great books. But what do they do when they read a crappy book, especially? I shouldn't even say a crappy book because really, unless it's not to crap on self-publishing, but let's face it, self-publishing has basically no barrier to entry. So there's a lot of folks out there that self-publish that pay for readers or pay for cover artists, pay for editors, pay for critique people, and really spend a lot of money and time investing in a book so that it really is up to professional standards. And there's other folks that just say, let's just put this together and slap a cover on that and just publish it, and hopefully it sells 1 million copies. So I think in that, with that in mind, um, chances are if it's published by a publisher such as say Crystal Lake Entertainment, there's a pretty good chance that that publisher thought it was a great book. So you could probably expect there's going to be some value in it, but maybe that book's not for everybody. So I think that even if you're reading a book from your favorite authors, you might still come across one that was a bit of a stinker for you. I mean, we see it all the time with Stephen King. It's very hot and cold. He's a very polarizing author, and some of the most devout King fans can read a book and think, nah, that was a stinker. That book sucked. It wasn't for me or whatever. So to answer your question, what do you do for that? I think the most important thing to do is just to be honest. And I think that's you're really doing yourself a disservice, the people reading the review a disservice, and frankly, you're doing the author a disservice as well if all you're doing is say, "Yeah, this book was great. Wow, they put a lot of effort in there. I'm going to give them 4 out of 5 stars. They did the best they can, and I think a lot of people are going to love this book. You should go check it out. Meanwhile, you hit send on it to wherever it's going to get posted, and you sit back and think, oh man, I hope the fact that I thought that book sucked doesn't come across my review. Well, it's going to come across. And if you're saying that every book is great, well, you're not really doing yourself a favor, because all of a sudden, if you're writing about everything is great, people aren't really going to trust you. And I think once you lose trust as a reviewer, nobody's going to care about your reviews, because people might read, one of your books that you highlighted as being a great book and thought, what was this person thinking? This book sucked. I think it's more important to be an honest reviewer, so that when you actually do say good things about a reviewer, or about a book rather, people will read that and think, yeah, I kind of thought the same thing. Okay, cool. I'm on the same wavelength as this person. And there might be some other people that think everything this person says is great, I don't like. Everything this person says sucks, I liked. Well, that's okay. You're just not a reviewer with the same taste in that person. So now that person will know, maybe all the books you said suck, they're going to read them because you got the opposite taste. I've been pretty lucky where I have read most of the books I've read. There's always been something that I've enjoyed about them. But there's been a few books where I thought, I'm sure there's going to be somebody who's going to like this book, but it's not for me. I mean, I reviewed a book about uh, a bad dad jokes. It was a monster joke book. And for the most part, it was a chore to get through. It was painful. I want to rip my eyes out at the end of it. But there were some things that I really enjoyed about it. So what I did is I had fun with it. I think I said one of my lines in that was something like, "Hey, here's a joke for you. What do you get when you cross, a bunch of bad monster jokes with a something or other? You get, death by 1,000 puns." So I try to have a little bit of fun with it, but I think it also gave people a sense that, yeah, it's going to be a chore, but I think it's got its place in the horror canon. Is it going to be for you? Maybe not to sit down and read it back to back, but you might want to pick it up now and again and hear some parts that I enjoyed that you might enjoy reading. Um, I remember one time, if you don't mind me rambling for a little bit, uh, my first conundrum when I got a book that I thought, straddled the line of being really good and really painful to read. I thought, what do I do with this? I don't want to get known as that guy that's just got, we've got enough Siskel and Eberts in the business. The authors I don't think deserve to get ripped apart. If you read a book that's really that bad, you're better off just being honest with the author and the publisher and saying, you know what, this book just isn't for me. I started reading it, and I'm just going to have to call a day for that. I'm not the best reviewer for this book, but thanks for the opportunity. If you can't find anything good to say about the book, then honestly, I don't think that there's any point in reading it just for the sake of bashing the author. The book just isn't for you. Move on. There's enough hate in the world that we don't need a reviewer that's just going to review something for the sake of hating all over it. That said, that one book that I read that I made that decision on earlier on in my writing career is, I was honest. I said, this is a balance between absolutely gorgeous, beautiful prose and just overwritten characters that don't really get to the point quick enough. And the author actually, because I always send my reviews to authors for sneak peeks, I sent it to him and he thought, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? Can you give me examples of why you thought my book was that bad in that area? And I thought, oh boy, here we go. This guy's going to crap all over me. I'm finished. It's going to get in a big hate war. So I explained to him exactly why I thought his book was just way overwritten. And he ended up getting back to me and said, yeah, I know what you mean. This was actually the first book I ever read. And believe it or not, I cut out 40,000 words from this, and I just did the best I could, but I know there's a lot I need to improve on here in my next book. So it ended up that the author actually agreed with me for the parts that I kind of chewed him for in my review. So it kind of worked out. So yeah, I think just being honest, focus on the parts that worked for you. If you thought the book sucked, give an honest example of why. Don't just say, yeah, this book sucked and the characters were boring. Okay, well, why did the book suck? Why was it boring? So you're actually giving an example of that so people can get a better understanding of, is this book for me? Am I going to like what this reviewer had to say? So that's kind of my take on that. And there's a section dedicated to my review book that kind of outlines that and gives some examples that are very clear cut and concise.
That's a good answer. Yeah, I asked because I recently read a book where I absolutely loved right up until the end.
Oh, the ending. Was it a Stephen King book?
No, it was actually uh, it was a cozy fantasy.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I still gave the book 4 stars because the book itself is great. It's just she just kind of fell flat on the ending.
Yeah.
It's like and it's the first in a series, so I gave her a little leeway because maybe some of those open-ended things will be tied up in the next book. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of us and a lot of folks that are probably watching this as well that are fans of Crystal Lake might have read a book called The Rising by Brian Keene, where people hated the end of that one so much that they forced Brian to write the sequel to that, City of the Dead, which actually explained the ending that people wanted to know about. So yeah, so kudos to you, and I think that was a great way to handle that, especially if it's a series and you never know what the author's going to do
Mm.
next.
Yeah. So, how did you you touched a little bit about this on this previously, but how did you research your book? Did you comb through the old reviews or do a deep dive analysis of your technique? What did you do for research?
Sure. So another good question. So my research for this one was pretty minimalistic. I guess really the initial research was sort of crowd driven, if you will, which kind of when I mentioned how I got the inspiration to write it in the first place was everybody asking me or seeing all the questions that people were asking rather on social media about how to write reviews, about how do you guys handle this aspect of a review, etc. So I kind of took all of that and I wanted to make sure that those were the questions I answered in my book. Most of the research I did was really all up here, was just sort of from my own experience. So I set out, outlining all the things that I thought made up all the components of a review. And then, to your point, I did certainly go back and because I really wanted to have some good solid examples in there. There's nothing worse than reading something that just gives you, generalities and concepts without actually showing you what the concepts look like when they're executed. And I find, for me as well, I'm a very visual person. You can give me the best lecture in the whole world about, I don't know, how serial killers work, for example. I'm just thinking we're having a big seminar on serial killers in my city here in a couple of months. So say if you do something like that, that's great. But unless you're going to have slideshows, you're going to show me exact, actual examples of all this, it's probably not going to sink in with me. So that's the way that I learn. So I want to make sure that I captured that for people that learn the same way. Not to mention, uh, I did kind of research and look at other review books on Amazon, on eBay, things like that, and I noticed that a lot of them they might have one or two examples, and that seemed to be a big highlight of the book. And for me, that didn't seem like much of a highlight. Where it's great, you've got this nice big book, and you give one example of. To me, that's just not good enough because there's so many different ways of writing a review. I find based on the style of the book that you're reviewing, that how do you capture all the information that you're trying to provide in one example. So going back, I read a lot of my reviews. Um, because it was always in the back of my mind that maybe I could use examples of what I've done to write or to help other people. I kept all my early drafts of various reviews, so I thought that was really cool. So I was able to go back and I was able to get everything from my initial note taking that I do when I write reviews to the first draft, which generally really sucks and looks like cat threw up on a plate, to what my editing process is and showing the final result. And also, so that's something I really wanted to capture in there. So I found that a lot of books on reviews just didn't have that. So I wanted to make sure that mine was a step above that. And I apologize too, really quick here. My phone is going absolutely nuts. I do have it on silent, but apparently I also have it on um, it's vibrating, and I don't know what's going on, but it is just vibrating constantly. So I'm actually going to turn my phone off. So sorry about that.
No worries.
I don't know if that's coming across at all, but I can hear it vibrating. So sorry about that. So life is real. Um, let's get rid of that. So yeah, so that's what I did for my research, and that was really it. It was very crowd driven. Going back on my older reviews and even the ones that kind of sucked, I wanted to put that in there as well. My earlier stuff. I actually had a review that I gave that as an example as well, and and I was hesitant about doing this because I didn't want to give the magazine a bad name, but I think that's if anything, it gives them a good name and how supportive they are of writers as well. They want you to succeed. So this is one here. So that's Remark. So it's an older one. I think it's from, I can't read because I don't, it's kind of dark in here. I think that's from 2007 or something. Right. I gave that example in there as well of of the review. I won't mention the book here, but for those that read that magazine, they'll be able to see it. And basically, it wasn't good enough for them, but because I got them right at the end of the deadline, they had to go to print. They had no choice but to. The editor is amazing, Monica S. Kubler. So she ended up doing the best that she could to reworking that and put that in there. So I gave an example of that in the book as well. And yeah, so that's kind of where my research came in. It was just kind of seeing what else is out there, trying to give people a better instructional manual, if you will, answering all the questions that I see on social media, and then just going through a lot of my old notes and seeing where I came from, and capturing everything from reading the book to writing notes to writing the drafts to the finished product, and why I made the editing choices that I made. So all that's in the guidebook.
Yeah. So do you think a casual reviewer, like just a reader who puts reviews on Amazon, can get benefit of the book from the book, or is it more aimed for someone who's in looking to be a more serious reviewer and maybe get paid for
Um, yes. Next question. So, no, I'll give you a bit more than that. No, the quick answer to that is yes, absolutely. And obviously I'm biased, and I'm going to say if you've never read a book or you hate reading books, buy my book. No, don't. Well, I mean, please buy my book anyways, but it might not be for you. Maybe buy it and put it on your shelf because it's got a really cool cover. But no, I think so definitely because I've been noticing a lot of people that uh, and this has been really encouraging. This was actually really exciting. So I reached out to the Books of Horror have a really cool, I guess, sister, brother, we'll call it a cousin, I guess, page called the Books of Horror Freeview. I think it's just called Preview, and it's a really cool group because it's set up where anybody that has a book they've read, they can go out there, they can say, "Hey, read my book, please, and I'll give you my free book," kind of thing. And so I went over there trying to solicit reviewers for this, and I was lucky enough that a lot of people came out and they're like, "Yes, I'll read your book," and it was really cool. I've gotten a couple of early reviews on that, but what was really cool is I had a lot of people saying, "Yes, is it okay? I just post up on Amazon. That's all that I do, but I would be able to post better reviews on there." And if that's again, I'm going to put air quotes. If that's all that you do, don't shortchange yourself because that is super super important. As a lot of authors will tell you that just like you know, Google and YouTube and Amazon is just like that. They all function off of an algorithm. So the more positive reviews that you put on a site, the better chance that that particular book that you're reviewing is going to pop up as more suggestions. And when you go and you buy, X book, it might say, "Hey, if people that love this book also happen to like this book, or if you want this book, maybe you'll like this book as well." And if that one book might be the best book in the world, but if only has a few scattered reviews because somebody was bored one day, they're like, "I'm just going to write something on Amazon," that book's not going to get in front of as many people. Whereas if they've got lots of people that are reviewing this, and maybe your review is really resonating for other people or on Goodreads, etc., then you might actually get a discussion going on that, and that's just going to help again get this is where exposure is a good word, where you're going to get that exposure on there. So absolutely, if you're just a casual reviewer, you don't have any intention of want to get paid, you just want to help support your authors, want to help support your fellow readers, absolutely this book has a lot of tools for being able to do just that. And that's one of the things that I talk about in the earlier parts of my book is it's really important to understand what your goals are, where you fit in. If your goal is just to be a casual reviewer because you like to again support your books and your authors and your fellow readers, then that's cool. Then you're probably not going to want to spend hours and hours on this, and if you don't get paid for it, you're probably going to be okay with that. Whereas if you really want to take it to the next level and you want to get paid for it, you want to see yourself in a magazine, then there's going to be tools in here that are going to help you to get there. And I think it's going to take a lot of the frustration away from it as well, because I don't want you to think that you have to be the best reviewer in the world to help somebody out. Even if all this does is increase your game by 1%, 5%, whatever, then I think that's going to benefit you no matter where you are in your reviewing, life cycle.
Yeah, definitely. And authors always love reviews because that does indeed help the algorithm and get
Yeah.
you on Amazon's radar as well for their own in-house promotions. So,
Absolutely, and it's a great way to get free books too. Let's not.
yeah,
I'm not going
yes,
to sugarcoat it. Don't. There's no shame in wanting to read for free, because again, the authors do benefit from it, and that's one of the best things as well. Is that we all have, especially as we get older, we have adult responsibilities. We might have time during commutes or dead time or whatever to read, but we don't have the finances to pick up every book that's being published out there. So reviewing is a great way to get free books, and in exchange for an honest review that's going to help an author out as well, whether you get paid for it or not. I think free books is pretty good payment as well.
mhm. So, how do you think you've grown as an interviewer, a reviewer, and a writer?
Wow. Well, I've since got kids, and I've got so that's definitely a growth period. That no, I think that's a good question, because that definitely takes some self reflection, because I don't really, I guess really the way that I've grown certainly is that, I mean, I get paid for them now, which is kind of nice. I've now been consistent enough, and I've met my deadlines enough. And for anybody reading this as well, if you do want to get paid for it, or if you do write for a publication or anything outside of your own personal platforms, such as Amazon, a blog, YouTube, whether you do video reviews, written reviews, what have you, um, anything outside of that, you're working with a publisher, there's a reason they call it a deadline. So, because if you cross that line, that is, you're expected to have a review in, you're dead. That publisher is probably not going to want to work for you as well. Just like Monica mentions, Monica Kubler, who's the book, an amazing book editor and an author herself for Rue Morgue magazine. She was amazing and was crazy enough to write an intro for my little book. One of the things she says in there is that reviewers that meet deadlines are hot. They're very sexy, and publishers will love you. So I've been so I've are you with me?
Yeah, your video froze there
Cool.
for a moment.
Oh, okay, cool. It's the nice thing I like about StreamYard too, is we can pick right up like it never
Yeah.
happened. So one thing I've learned is that by being consistent, by meeting deadlines, by consistently putting in quality reviews that are engaging, that are honest as well, that I now have editors will ask me pretty frequently too. They'll say, "Hey, we've got a review that kind of fell out here. We need to fill a space. Are you reading anything? Do you have anything to review?" And I always do it. Sometimes I might only have a week to read a book and get the review out, but I'm gonna do that. So that's one way that I've grown, is that I find that as I've been getting a little bit better at this, I've been getting quicker at writing the reviews, going through the editing process, and coming up with the finished product. So that's one way that I've grown. Um, Probably the most rewarding way I would say that I've grown as a reviewer is not only being able to be more consistent, so that, I mean, there's still very challenging. Some books are reading, I think, how the heck am I going to squeeze this into, say, a 300 word review, or you know whatever your word count is. And the nice thing too, I want to say to people is that I don't think that any review should be more than 500 words. I think that 300 to 500 words is probably pretty good. Any more than that, it becomes an essay, and there could be, certainly room for that. But I think that you're not telling a story necessarily. You're just trying to sell the sizzle of a story, not necessarily the story itself. So I think that's one thing I've learned as well, is how to fit. I mean, I once sold an entire six series, a six book series, and I put that into a 300 word thing. I can now do that with confidence. It's a challenge, but I can do that. And I think that the best way of growing too, and I think a really exciting way, even if people watching this don't really care about getting paid, is an added bonus, is all the authors you meet. whether they're independent authors or they're best-selling authors or they're Bram Stoker award-winning authors. This is a great way to get in touch with them because if you're like me, it's a nice bonus saying, "So, thanks for letting me review your book. Are you okay with me interviewing you about your book as well?" And I can offer that. I started off having, just blogger on what the heck was it? Google Blogger, yeah, Google Blogger. I started off having a blog on that, and it would often post my interviews on there, which is a great way to meet authors and a great way to keep in touch with them, so that they're more inclined to want to give you more of their books to review. So I don't know if that's a way that I've grown. I guess it is. I didn't get that in the beginning, so that's kind of a cool way of accumulating those connections and those author friends. And a lot of those authors I started off just reviewing have become friends and become mentors. And it's so enriching having these amazing people in your life to be able to chat with, to review, to interview, and have that access to them, especially for those that do become friends. So that's been a super exciting you know growth of being a reviewer for the past 20 years.
You are also a horror fan. What is it about the genre that appeals to you as a reader?
I find that I love answering this kind of question because you know we always get that asked. I was like, "Why horror? What do you like about horror? I can't believe you read that garbage." And I love that garbage because it's not garbage. I think one of the most amazing things about horror is that there's no borders, especially with the current wave that we're seeing, this huge influx of extreme horror that really taps into the more certainly borderless, scary things that are out there and puts it right up front in our face. I think that, um, and I just recently read, of course, Christopher Triana's newsletter. So I'm thinking I got my mind in the gloom and doom of the real world, because let's face it, the world isn't always a nice place. I think that whether or not we acknowledge that real monsters exist, that terrible things happen to good people all the time, and terrible things happen to terrible people and make other good people do terrible things. Whether we acknowledge that or not, it's out there. And I think that's the beautiful part about horror books and the horror genre in general is that it allows us to acknowledge that in a safe environment. It's like a roller coaster. It's exciting. It's scary, but chances are you're probably not going to die from it. Of course, unfortunately, maybe that's a bad metaphor because sometimes accidents do happen on roller coasters. But that aside, it's very much like riding a roller coaster where you can be scared, you can face your monsters, and you know that you're going to be able to walk away from them. And I think that some of the best horror that's out there, whether or not it is on the extreme end of the spectrum or it's more quiet. I think it gives us a chance to be terrified by our monsters, come face to face with them, and even help to understand them a little bit better, to the point where we can maybe understand the monsters that we have to deal with. Whether it's has to do with mental health or has to do with a terrible neighbor or has to do with, I don't know, politics or world, global warming, or the things our world basically trying to turn inside out and essentially turn it against us. I think it maybe gives us an opportunity to kind of understand the psychology of what we are dealing with in the real world, so that we can help to understand it to the point where we can sort of have better understanding and control of the monsters rather than let the monsters control us, whether or not we choose to acknowledge them or not. And I think that the horror genre gives us a wonderful place to be able to do just that, knowing that as much as it might psychologically mess us up for a little while, we're going to be okay. And I think it's nice sometimes having your heart ripped out, having it shoved in your face, and then allowing us to walk away knowing that our hearts are still very much in our chest, but maybe we have a better understanding of what is inside of our heart and how we fit into the world around us that is full of monsters that we can and can't see. And
Okay,
it's just
so
fun.
yeah, it is. So, how do you think horror fiction has evolved over the years?
um, I think it's evolved beautifully over the years. I think that, sort of to touch back a little bit on what I mentioned about self-publishing, where a lot of times that can have a bad rap, and for good reason, because it gives no barrier to entry. I think at the same time, because it gives no barrier to entry, I think there's a lot more people that are willing to pick up, you know, their stake in the horror genre, their proverbial torch, and they can run with it. I would certainly hope that anybody that wants to do that at least has a respect for the genre, that you know just because they can slap something together and post it up and call themselves a horror author, that they at least go through the channels of hiring a decent cover artist, hiring an editor, so that they can present themselves in the best possible light. Because if they have a voice, they've got a great story to tell. I think they should be able to tell that. And I think that there's a lot more publishers out there that are willing to give new authors a chance. I'm certainly not new, but as far as publishing books, I'm brand new, and I'm so grateful that we have places like Crystal Lake Entertainment out there that's willing to give a new guy like me a chance. Uh, and I think I think where I've really seen the horror genre thrive and grow as well is that there's a lot more diversity in voices within the horror genre. I think that the horror genre has become an amazing representation of people from various minorities, whether it's a minority from their sexual orientation, whether it's a minority from their I don't political orientation, or the way they look at the world, or people that are of all walks of life, and uh, various perspectives that maybe they didn't get a voice before, and now they've got this amazing voice. Uh, you know, whether we've got so many voices from cultural backgrounds now that aren't just being represented, but are being recognized and being awarded for having fantastic work in the horror community. I mean, for the first time ever, we've seen, two Latin authors, that just won a friggin' Bram Stoker Award recently. And I'm going to pronounce their names incorrectly, so I don't want to screw that up by saying their names. Um, I'm going to try anyways. I think Gabriel Iglesias, Cynthia Paleo, were two Latin people that before wouldn't have gotten a voice in the horror genre if it hadn't gotten to the point where it is right now. You've got guys like, and there's a lot of women authors too that are finally being recognized for being these powerhouses that they are. I mean, some of my favorite authors now are from I guess a minority or from a marginalized community, such as Eric LaRocca is just a powerhouse of an author. Red Legault, who maybe 10 years ago wouldn't have gotten the recognition that she deserves, who's an absolute powerhouse of an author. And I think that we're seeing all these cultural diversities that are coming together within the horror genre, and the horror genre is all about you know being able to give these various diversities a voice. And I think that just helps us to get more perspective on these amazing authors that we're seeing out there. I mean, Aaron Dries is another one who's from a marginalized community as a gay author from Australia, as well. So we're seeing all these different unique voices being put in there, and it gives us a chance of being able to expand on our world as well. And I think that that's kind of going back to the thing that I love about the horror genre, is it really dives into the diversity of the monsters within our world. It's given us a chance of being able to see all these people that are seeing monsters that, quite frankly, we have no idea even exist until they brought them out into the light and given us perspective of how they're dealing with these monsters and their marginalized worlds. Uh, so yeah, I think that's a beautiful thing about the horror genre, that it really has developed into much more of a melting pot of all of these different diverse authors with their own unique voices, and the horror genre is a place for them to shine, and without borders. And I think that's a beautiful, amazing thing. And I hope we continue to see a lot more of this down the road.
Yeah, you can add two of my favorite authors to that list too, Lee Murray and Angela Eureka Smith, because those two women are absolutely brilliant.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for mentioning those names as well. So I know that, and I always feel hesitant of mentioning certain authors, because I mean, thankfully, and again, that's one of the things I love about the horror authors, that there's so many new voices that I'm almost afraid to mention a few and then forget other ones. But I think all the people that we both mentioned are great places to start if you want to see how well the horror genre is doing.
Yeah, and both of those ladies are also awesome interviews, by the way.
Yeah.
So, besides horror, what other genres do you read?
You mean there's other genres outside of horror? Um, yeah, no, it's and I think that's important to get outside your comfort zone as well of the horror genre. There's, I mean, a good story is a good story. So I do like a lot of true crime. I mean, and I have to say that of late, maybe over the last few years or so, I haven't unfortunately gone out of the horror genre too much because I'm so busy reviewing books that happen to be in the horror genre. That's what I publish in. So 99% of all the stuff that I read is in the horror genre. Although I do like, and that's one of the things I like about the horror genre too. I'm going to sort of steal a bit of thunder, I guess, from the last question too, is that with that diversity, you're seeing a lot more cross pollination of genres where you're seeing, kind of quiet horror, you're seeing more speculative horror, you're seeing, dark fantasy horror and that sort of thing. So I really like to kind of be a little bit sneaky too. I mean, one of the books that I read not too long ago was from John Urbansick. Urbansick. Apparently, even Brian Keene, who's one of his best friends, still screws up his last name too. So John Urbansick, he does more dark fantasy kind of stuff. So I reviewed one of his books, which was The Secret History of the Palace Theater, which is more fantasy and a little bit of sci-fi in there as well. So I really enjoy that kind of stuff that straddles the line. I love fantasy books. But then I also like a lot of books that are just about life. I've got a couple books behind me on the shelf by Mitch Albom, who used to be a sports broadcaster. He's written some of the books that some people watching this might be familiar with. Is what the heck is it? No, I just totally brain farted. Tuesdays with Maury or The Five People You Meet in Heaven, and it's just about life. Which I know it seems like a bit of a cop out of an answer, but it really is. Stuff like S.E. Hinton, which is also an amazing female writer who writes stuff like The Outsiders, Rumblefish, where a lot of her stories are just, again, about just navigating life. So I really enjoy reading outside the genre as far as that kind of stuff goes. But as far as reading outside the genre and recent authors, I'm afraid I'm going to suck at this question because that's pretty much what I've been sort of inundated with over the last few years is the horror stuff because I don't really get a chance to read too much unless I'm reviewing a book. My TBR stack even of just books that I need to review. Sorry, I'm patting my stack over here, which is just over there. I've got about 5 books lined up that I need to review over the next couple of months yeah, before I lose track of them. So, but yeah, that's the kind of stuff I like reading outside the genre. I think it's important to read outside of the genre as well because there's some stuff. I even like reading some of the Western stuff as well. And thank God that some of the horror authors I like are also diving into some of the Western stuff too. So I love me a good Western. I never knew until I read one of um, Richard Matheson's Western novels as well. And yeah, I just love all kinds of different genres. Story is story. I just love a good story.
Yeah, the weird Western subgenre is very interesting.
It is. It is. Yeah, it's very fascinating. I know Wiley Yun's got a couple of great ones out there as well that he's done. So he's a great one.
Okay, so who are some of your favorite authors?
So do you have another hour to spare? So no, and I think some of the original favorite authors that I've had, I've got to go with my OGs. Obviously guys like Stephen King, a lot of his early stuff. I grew up on that. Um, I grew up on Carol Lewis Stevenson as well. That was one of my first horror novels that I ever read was Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I think I was maybe 8 years old when I read that. That left a huge mark on me when I was a kid. Clive Barker, 100%. Again, I think I was maybe about 12 or so when I came across his book, the Books of Blood. Actually, I found that on my cousin's bedroom floor. As a typical boy, his room was a mess, but that book stood out to me, so I picked it up and thought, this sounds interesting. and I had no idea what I was in for. So Clive Barker still stands as one of my favorite authors of all time. Then I got back into, Jack Ketchum is always a favorite of mine. Thank God he's got still a few books left out there that I haven't read, so I've been putting those off to kind of read them, so I can feel like it's a brand new book to me. And he's still writing strong. Richard Matheson, he's a genre of himself. If you're not sure what kind of genre you're into, or you want to live outside of the horror genre, read Richard Matheson. He's from Star Trek to fantasy to just book about life, to horror to war books. He's fantastic. Some of my newer favorite authors that I've come to love is I've already mentioned a couple of them, such as Red Legault, Eric LaRocca, Laurel Hightower, all fantastic authors. Aaron Dries, I found him. We did. There was a virtual convention called the the COVID Con that was put together when everybody was in lockdown. They did kind of a virtual thing, and Aaron Dries was one of those authors. And I'm a sucker for a good accent, be it Australia, British, whatnot. He's from Australia. And one of his books that I've read still stands as probably can I swear at all on this podcast?
Yeah, I don't mind. So
Okay, great. Because this is one book that fucked me up more so than most other books that I've ever read. It's called I don't know if I have it, I can pull it out. As a matter of fact, I do. So this is one here. So there's a few books that have scarred me indelibly. Jack Ketchum's The Girl Next Door is 100% one of them. This is another one too. It's called The Fallen Boys by Aaron Dries. Um, for anybody that's into happy endings where everything's nice and tied up at the end, don't read this book ever. This book absolutely screwed me up, and it was terrible too because I had a young son at the time, and fairly early on. I mean, I think it's even on the synopsis in the back where it's a very grief-stricken book where the main character's son dies horribly, and the way that he talks about his death and how he died, that just ripped my heart apart. Because I had at the time 1-year-old boy, 2-year-old boy who was just a little bit younger than the boy that dies in this book. But then what transpires because of that, and what this dad does to try to get some kind of justification for the death, and what turns into justification to revenge. This book just, it just, I'm still scarred by it to this day. It's so uncomfortable. It's such a good book. And apparently that's all that Aaron does. So he writes those kind of books. So he's definitely one of my favorite authors that have come out of the scene as well. I'm sure that I'm forgetting a whole whack of them as well. Daniel Brom is another fantastic author as well, who's pretty new. He writes very quiet horror as well, so I need to mention him because I think he's a fantastic contrast as well. He does more kind of like John Urbancic, where he writes more to give you a sense of wonder than a sense of dread. I mean, that man can look down a blank alley and tell an incredible story about it and put you in that alley and you then make you realize that that alley isn't even in your own world. And so, yeah, just some fantastic authors out there. So that's certainly a few of my recent favorites for people to read.
okay, so what do you like to do when you're not writing? Do you have any hobbies or hidden talents?
Yeah, my hidden talent is trying to find time to write and to read. I like to think that's a bit of a hidden talent. So, um, yeah, I do. I mean, I love to spend time with my kids. I mean, that's the most important thing. So my son is stuck with me for life. Where I've got an amazing 8-year-old daughter who lives primarily with her mom, so that I love it because I do have such fractured time with her that when she's down for the weekends, that's it. I don't write. I don't usually read her, and then it's all about the kids. So that's a huge nice thing. And I think that we can often tunnel vision ourselves so much, especially when we get into the habit of just kind of we go to work, we do some adult responsibilities, whether you've got to water the plants, feed the cats, or play with your kids, which are all wonderful things. But then we kind of fall in love with their monsters, and sometimes that can sort of be our entire world. So I think it's really important to get out and ground yourself. So I really like to get out in nature every chance I get. Sometimes I have to literally force myself down the stairs and kind of grab myself by the collar and say, get away from that computer or that stupid Facebook or whatever. It's, get your ass outside, get into the forest, walk through, feel the wind in your hair kind of thing. So I love camping. I love to get out and do the great outdoors. Um, I don't really have too many hidden talents, I guess, although I don't know if you can kind of see some of the boxes up there. So I do tend to do a lot of mod podge. I haven't done that in a long time. I'm disgustingly late. I was supposed to write an article for the HWA pod or they do a creepy crafts. Um, the amazing woman who has been trying to organize that has stopped hounding me for that, which I feel kind of bad because she's clearly given up. So I need to hound her to write an article about that because that's a really cool craft that I love to do. Um, I collect magazines, so what do you do with all of them? You either recycle them or throw them out. So I'll cut up pictures and I'll do kind of Mod Podge boxes. Do I have any? Actually, I've got a small box here. I can show you. So I don't know if that's a hidden talent or not, but that's kind of what I do too. So there is a
That's
kind
cool.
of a cool box.
Is
Hopefully, I
that
don't have any.
Evil Dead on the top of that? Do I spy?
You do spy that. Yep, we've got a little bit of Evil Dead over there. We've got a little bit of Frankenstein, a little bit of Lost Boys, which apparently they're remaking. Which I cringe at that because I can appreciate taking certain movies and remaking them. Get them in for the new generation. But that was just perfect the way it was done. It's kind of like people are crapping all over the Crow, but I'll wait to see the remake before I crap all over it. But yeah, so that's one of the things that I guess that I do on there as well. Yeah, as far as hobbies, I mean, it's all about the kids and trying to prove to the cats that I'm in charge. I usually lose that battle because cats are real dominators by nature.
Yeah.
So you don't train them; they train you.
Okay, so do you think you'll be writing any more books in the future?
100%. So there is one. I don't know if I should share this early in the game. Who's going to be publishing that? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But there is one that I put together a collection of interviews and reviews that I've done over the last few years. So there's quite a few of them in there. So I've I don't know what the kind of font's going to be used, but I do have a publisher that's very interested in looking at that. So, for example, my Frank Darabont conversation that I had, that's going to be in here as well. A lot of fantastic stuff. A lot of my articles are going to be in there. I chatted with all the folks for the last voyage of the Demeter. Uh, you're not going to see them anywhere right now except for in there because I did video chats with them, but Universe was very strict about this is for the article. So they are going to be there as a written interview in this book. So that'll hopefully be out sometime next year. I have until September to finish it and get it out. So I'm working on that. Putting together a collection of drabbles as well. That's going to be something that I'm hoping to have at conventions. And I also am waiting for a fiction book. So that's way overdue. So with being so busy with all my nonfiction stuff, because I do find that that has been the quickest barrier to entry as far as making some money doing this. Uh, I do have a fiction book that I wrote when I was in lockdown as well. I work for long-term care in my daytime, so I showed up with a sore throat about 2 weeks into our COVID, pandemic, and nobody knew what to do. So I'm like, I got a cold, sore throat, so they sent me home for 2 weeks, and I just thought, might as well keep myself busy. My son was 6 months old, so I wrote a nonfiction book about 50,000 words, so it just qualifies as a novel. So that's kind of the mix between, I guess, Matheson's What Dreams May Come and Dante's Inferno. So I'm waiting. I just put that out for edits, and that should be coming back in about a week or so. So I'm hoping to kind of put some focus on that to get out there, so that you know people know me as, instead of just that nonfiction reviewer guy. Hopefully they'll know me as an author as well for fiction books. So I've got a few pokers in the fire, so to speak, that I'm very much looking forward to getting out there. And then not a book, but I am hoping to put my guidebook into the form of a workshop as well, to make it super accessible and for people that just learn more visually too. That'll be a cool addition. I've actually talked with Joe Minard from Crystal Lake about putting that as a workshop in with his online portal that he put together for authors, Shadows and Ink, as well. So I'm really looking forward to putting that together, and hopefully folks can access it through there, and other amazing workshop classes that I know Joe is working on, and for to give back to a lot of authors too. I think that's incredible.
Yeah, he's got big plans for the workshop stuff, so yeah.
I know.
Anyway,
I want to get him on my podcast too, just so I can try to keep track of everything he's got in the works as well, because he's the real deal. He's the real deal.
yeah, definitely. So, I think we'll wrap the interview up here, and I'd
Cool.
like to thank you for being a guest today. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
You as well, Anita. This has been incredible. Thank you very much for having me on.
Okay, that's it for this episode, and bye for now.
Ciao.